Everyone thinks Drogon burned the Iron Throne out of grief, a grieving dragon, lashing out after watching his mother die in Jon Snow's arms, torching the ugly chair that started the whole bloody mess. That's the story most people walked away with. But what if that dragon wasn't grieving at all? What if he was taking orders? Bran Stark didn't just win the Game of Thrones by sitting quietly in a corner with a knowing smile. He used the three-eyed raven's power to force a dragon to incinerate the realm's mystical anchor, and it wasn't an accident. It was a calculated extraction, timed to the second, and almost nobody caught it. Stick with me here. Let's start with a scene everyone remembers, but almost nobody actually examines. Jon Snow walks into that throne room in King's Landing, stepping over ash and rubble, past the corpse of the woman he loved and killed. Drogon is curled around Daenerys' body, and the dragon lets out this scream that shakes the walls. Then he does something strange. He doesn't kill Jon. He doesn't even threaten him. A dragon in grief, staring at the man who just drove a knife into his mother's heart, and Drogon just looks at him. Then he turns his head toward the throne itself, opens his jaws and burns it down to a puddle of twisted metal, before flying off with Daenerys' body in his claws. Now here's the question nobody asks out loud. Why the throne? If this is pure animal grief, the target should be Jon. That's the source of the pain. Dragons in this universe are not passive creatures. We've watched them burn cities, burn armies, burn anyone who threatens the person they love. So why does Drogon skip the obvious target and instead spend his fire on a chair? This is where the puzzle pieces really start to twist. Because at the exact same moment this is happening in King's Landing, where is Bran? He's sitting in Winterfell, eyes rolled back deep in a warg. We know from earlier seasons that Bran's power isn't limited to ravens and weirwood trees. He can slip into the mind of any living creature, and the show goes out of its way more than once to remind us that his control gets stronger during moments of extreme emotional intensity. Remember Hodor? Remember how young Bran accidentally fused two moments in time together during a single traumatic event, rewriting a man's entire existence because the emotional and magical stakes were high enough to blow a hole straight through the laws of cause and effect? That's not a minor detail. That's the show telling you exactly what Bran is capable of when the moment calls for it. And what moment in the entire series carries more raw magical and emotional charge than the death of the last Dragon Queen, at the hands of the man she loved, standing on top of the most contested seat of power in the known world? If there was ever a crack in reality wide enough for the three-eyed raven to reach through and grab the reins of a dragon's mind, this was it. Look at the visual language the show uses here too. The throne doesn't just burn, it melts, slowly, deliberately, the camera lingering on it far longer than a simple grief-fueled tantrum would require. Compare that lingering shot to earlier moments in the series when ancient magical objects are destroyed, like the visual weight given to the undoing of the Night King, or the slow-motion collapse of the wall. The show has a habit of stretching out time whenever something with deep magical significance is being unmade. That's not an accident of editing. That's a director telling you to pay attention, because something bigger than a sad dragon is happening on screen. So let's talk about what the throne actually was, because most people watching just see an uncomfortable metal chair made of melted swords. But go back to the history buried in the books and the world-building material, and the throne was never just furniture. Aegon the Conqueror had it forged from 1,000 swords surrendered by his defeated enemies, melted together with dragon fire. Dragon fire. Not a blacksmith's forge, not ordinary flame. The exact same primal ancient magic that runs through Valyrian steel, through the blood of the dragon itself. That throne was built using the same forces that bind the Targaryen bloodline to power in the first place. Think about what that means. For centuries, the seat of power in Westeros was quite literally forged from an act of dragon magic, sitting at the heart of the capital, anchoring the idea that only fire and blood could rightfully rule. Every Targaryen king who sat on it wasn't just occupying a chair. He was sitting inside a monument to blood-soaked conquest, a physical object that kept reinforcing the same cycle over and over. Conquest, succession through violence, dynasties built and torn down by war. The throne wasn't a symbol of peace. It was a beacon calling every ambitious lord, every exiled prince, every desperate claimant back to the same violent pattern, generation after generation. Now bring that back to Bran. Bran's entire arc, from the moment he becomes the three-eyed raven, is about seeing patterns other people can't see. He watches history loop, He watches kings rise and fall for the same tired reasons, and more than once, both in his own words and in what the show shows us through his visions, Bran demonstrates an understanding that Westeros is trapped, that the wheel keeps turning no matter who sits at the top of it. Tyrion even hands him the perfect setup earlier in that final season, talking about breaking the wheel, about ending the cycle of strong men crushing the weak. But here's the twist that most fans glossed right over. You don't break a wheel like that just by changing who sits on the throne. You break it by destroying the machine that keeps spinning it. Let's go back to one of the most quietly unsettling lines in the entire finale. Standing in front of the surviving lords of Westeros, pitching Bran as the next ruler, Tyrion asks the room a simple question. Why do you think he travelled all this way? He offers it as a rhetorical flourish, proof that fate pulled Bran south to be here at exactly this moment. But rewatch that scene with the theory in mind, and it stops sounding like a poetic aside. It starts sounding like Tyrion, without realising it, handing the room the one detail that actually explains everything. Bran didn't need to make that journey. He chose to. And Tyrion, supposedly the cleverest man in Westeros, never once stops to ask why. Because think about the timeline. Bran didn't need to physically travel to King's Landing to see what happened there. He can walk into Ravens, he can watch events unfold from Winterfell through the Weirwood network. He's done it constantly throughout the show. So why make the actual journey south, arriving just in time to be handed a crown in the very last scene? If his only goal was to end up as king through a council vote, he didn't need to be present in the city at all. Unless being physically close mattered for something else. Unless proximity strengthened his ability to reach across the psychic and magical distance and take hold of Drogon at the precise moment grief cracked Daenerys' mind wide open. Now let's rewind further and look at Daenerys' spiral into madness with fresh eyes. Her turn toward tyranny gets blamed on grief, on the deaths of Rhaegal and Missandei, on isolation, on the Targaryen bloodline's history of madness catching up with her. All of that is true on the surface, but Bran spends the entire final stretch of the series doing almost nothing visible. He barely speaks. He barely moves. Characters walk past him, half forgetting he exists, treating him like furniture with a face. And that's exactly the kind of position a puppet master would want. Nobody suspects the quiet kid in the wheelchair staring out a window. Nobody questions why he keeps warging into Ravens right before major turning points in the war. The show hands us Bran watching, again and again, at moments conveniently close to Daenerys' unravelling, and we're trained by that point to see it as passive observation rather than active influence. And here's the detail that really tightens the noose on this theory. Every other magical force capable of challenging Bran's ascension gets wiped out in the exact same stretch of story. The Night King and his entire army of the dead, gone. Viserion, the dragon turned into an ice-breathing weapon of the Night King, destroyed along with him. Rhaegal shot down by Euron's fleet. Drogon, the last dragon standing, flies off into self-imposed exile after the throne burns, never to be seen ruling the skies over Westeros again. By the end, dragons, the single most powerful check on Bran's kind of magic, are functionally erased from the world. Coincidence? Maybe. But this show has spent 8 seasons proving it doesn't believe in convenient coincidences without a reason hiding underneath them. So let's say the theory holds. Let's say Bran really did guide Drogon's fire onto that throne. What does he actually gain from it? Think about what a king with the three-eyed raven's abilities actually represents once he's sitting on an empty seat of power, with no ancient magical throne left to physically anchor the office. A council of lords elects him, democratically in front of witnesses, which sounds progressive and fair on the surface, breaking the wheel just like Tyrion promised. But look closer at what kind of ruler just got installed. Not a warrior with an army that could be overthrown, not a bloodline that could be challenged by a rival claimant with better lineage. A man who can see everything, remember everything, exist everywhere at once through the eyes of animals and the roots of ancient trees. A man whose power isn't tied to a bloodline, a marriage, or a military. A man whose power cannot be inherited, cannot be assassinated in the traditional sense, and cannot be challenged by anyone who doesn't share his exact supernatural nature. Now remove the throne itself from the equation. With the old seat of power gone, there's no more physical object symbolising conquest through fire and blood. No more monument daring the next ambitious lord to march an army south and take it by force. On paper, that looks like peace. It looks like the wheel finally broken. But look at what actually replaces it. Instead of a throne anyone could theoretically fight for, you now have a ruler who quite literally cannot be replaced by force, because his power was never rooted in that chair to begin with. Destroy the throne, and you don't just end the old cycle of violence. You also remove the one weak point an enemy might have used against a king like Bran. No throne to burn, no crown to steal, no fortress of dragon-forged steel to conquer. Just a man whose authority lives inside his own mind, spread across 1,000 eyes in 1,000 different bodies. That's not breaking the wheel. That's replacing a wheel anyone could theoretically grab hold of with an invisible one, spinning entirely inside the consciousness of a single, near-omniscient being who nobody in Westeros fully understands, let alone has the tools to oppose. Sit with that idea for a second, because it gets darker the longer you think about it. A king who can see through the eyes of every raven in the Seven Kingdoms. A king who can slip into the minds of animals and apparently influence them during moments of extreme emotional strain. A king with perfect memory of every conversation, every betrayal, every secret plan whispered behind closed doors, stretching back further than any living person could verify. What does rebellion even look like against a ruler like that? How do you plot in secret against a man who might be watching through the eyes of the bird sitting on your windowsill? The destruction of the Iron Throne in this light isn't the final act of a broken war. It's the opening move of a much quieter reign. One where the last physical symbol capable of uniting an uprising is gone, replaced by a source of power so alien, so difficult to even conceptualize, that most of Westeros probably doesn't grasp what they're actually living under. Bran gets voted in looking humble, harmless, almost tragically detached from ordinary human ambition. That's the perfect disguise for something that stopped being entirely human the moment the three-eyed raven took hold of him. So maybe the ending we were handed wasn't a hopeful one after all. Maybe it wasn't a story about a broken wheel and a fairer world. Maybe it was the story of an ancient non-human intelligence, finally securing a permanent, unchallengeable grip on the mortal world, using a burned chair as the closing move in a game it had been playing since long before any of us realized it had even started. What do you think? Was Drogon really just grieving? Or did Bran just pull off the most quietly terrifying power grab in the entire show? Drop your theory in the comments. I read every single one of them. And if this kind of deep dive into the hidden layers of Westeros is your thing, hit subscribe, because there are a lot more of these buried secrets waiting to be pulled apart.